What's up? Hey, hello, everyone. Wow. So today we are back going to be talking about Survivor Season 37, Episode 8. What an amazing episode. I am still shook from last Wednesday. So my name is Rachel.
And I'm Alyssa. And to pair it with an amazing episode, we reached an amazing milestone on this channel. We just got 400 subscribers. So we'd like to take this time to thank you all for watching and listening to us talk about Survivor, because it's one of our favorite things to do. And we love getting to share it with you all.
Yeah, thank you all so much. It's so exciting. Every single week we're like loving doing this. So it's a ton of fun that people are wanting to listen to two 20-year-olds talk to a camera every week. So that's amazing. We have a lot to talk about. This episode was so good from literally start to finish. Everything led up to this amazing viewer blindside and team blindside, basically, of everyone not knowing where the vote was actually going. So it was an amazing episode all around. I was on like the edge of my seat/bed the entire 40 minutes.
Yeah, I actually got spoiled because I wasn't able to watch the episode on Wednesday night. But even after knowing who was going home, the whole time I was like, how is this going to happen? How's it going to work? And then I saw the episode and I was like, wow. Like, it still blew my mind, even though I knew where it was going to end up.
Yeah, the viewers definitely got bamboozled because they did not show any scenes where they talk through this final plan. And I liked it, and then you can fill in the pieces after the fact through like the secret scenes that they're posting, or just through like common sense kind of things, like, oh, they wouldn't split the votes unless they knew Davy was going to potentially play an idol kind of thing, and they wouldn't just randomly split the votes.
Yeah, and I think it was also really cool because we had foreshadowing with, I think it was Dan said, like, oh, it's going to be a Brochacho blindside.
Oh,
And
John said that. I'm so
Oh,
sad.
John said that. Oh, yeah. So it's definitely foreshadowing, because it's like he's foreshadowing his own demise and he just doesn't even know it. And I bet if he watched the episode last night, he was probably like,
Yeah.
you get that self-flagellation afterwards because you're like, that is so.
Yeah, I was like, oh my God, that's such a cute thing. Like, they should have hashtagged it. Brochacho Blindside was so cute when John said it in the middle of the episode, and then he got voted out, and then he said it again in his little exit interview, and I'm like, this is so sad. The Brochacho Blindside was on yourself. Haha. But yeah, I think going into like the start of this sequence of like events that led up to the blindside at the end of the episode, we see that Davy, Carl, and Nick find a vote steal. So technically it's in Nick's possession kind of thing, but those three work together. I don't know how Carl just randomly appeared on the beach, but those three work together to find this vote steal. And like we said last podcast, the merge feast palm trees were a clue. Davy distracting everyone by doing his weird thing on the beach was so funny, like cool, good. I don't know. I'm glad that the Davids found the vote steal. Definitely, like, I'd rather them have it than the Goliaths.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that was really funny about Davy, like, doing his whole, like, Tai Chi sequence thing was the fact that, like, it's not a typical way that people like play off finding an advantage or whatever. They're just like, oh, I'm gonna go get water or whatever, and then Davy's out here like doing crazy stuff to distract people. And I just thought that was a fresh new way to distract people from the fact that you're getting an advantage.
Yeah, I think Davy had a really good episode this time, like, but from finding like the clue to finding or helping find the vote steal to making this plan and using the idol and everything like that. I think Davy had a great night. Glad the vote steal is in the David's hands. Like, now when we talk about next week with this 6-5 vote, definitely will probably come into play to even out the playing field, which I'm like, this is so crazy how like poetic everything is working out. And the Davids could literally have the upper hand next week and bring it back down to a 5-5 even split. So that is so crazy.
Yeah, I think it's especially crazy because like Mike was worrying the whole time about like how the Davids were gonna pull one over on him. And I thought it was really interesting that like I feel like it was almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like him being so worried about the Davids was, I think, part of the reason why they chose two Goliaths to like split the vote between, obviously, because you also just want to get your opponents out. But I was kind of like, Mike was so worried about the Goliaths and Christian, and then it kind of like came back to bite him, and now he's going to have to worry even more about the Davids and Christian. So that's cool.
Yeah, Mike gets everyone on board to vote Christian out, and everyone, likes Christian sort of thing. They're like, we need to vote him out. It was really interesting, I felt like, when Mike was like, oh, as a viewer watching this, you're either like rooting for Christian to get further in the game, or you're like banging your head against the wall, asking why these people aren't voting someone like Christian out. And I thought that was so cool because, like, you break the third line, whatever, and it's like,
Fourth wall.
yeah, the third wall, and he's talking about
Fourth wall.
So it's so crazy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too because like last season, our big thing was like, oh my God, when is Laurel going to turn on Wendell and Dom? When is Laurel going to turn on Wendell and Dom? And it like just never happened. So as a viewer to like keep expecting like one of these big dogs to go down and then to have to watch people over and over choose to vote out someone else who's less dangerous is like, ugh.
Yeah, so like having that knowledge or like being able to foreshadow, oh, this person's gonna be a big personality among the viewers was so neat because I feel like you never have people thinking about like, oh, it's a TV show. How is this going to come across on TV? Or like it's never being said. You're probably thinking like, oh, how am I going to be edited kind of thing while you're out there. But now it's been actually said on the show, which I thought was so like neat because it has not like really happened. And so just having that premonitions knowledge of like, okay, this dude is someone that we should need to take out.
Yeah, I think it's interesting just because like Mike is like a TV screenwriter, and so like he knows more like what it looks like on TV. And I think that's also why his jokes are just much funnier than everyone else's because like he's been doing it for so long that he knows what a hit and a miss looks like for like TV jokes. But like what I thought was really interesting about Mike gunning for Christian was that it was the exact same thing that Angelina was doing last week. And instead of being like, oh my God, she's being so pushy, everyone's like, yeah, we should get Christian out. And Angelina like points out like, this is not the first time that I've had an idea or another woman has had an idea and then a man repeats it and gets credit for it. And like we've done a whole video about sexism in Survivor. And so I thought it was really cool that like Survivor players are beginning to acknowledge sexism in Survivor. And then the EW recap, Doughton asked Jeff Probst about like what he thinks gender relations in Survivor look like. So that's cool.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Like, we don't know the entire story, so we don't know if, like, the reasoning behind the timing of the Christian vote. Last week, definitely, we were like, Angelina's on the right path. She realizes Christian's a big threat. We all realize Christian's a big threat, but is that the right timing to vote someone like Christian out? Last week, people were still like Brochacho strong or Strike Force strong, whatever, and they still needed Christian in their alliance, whereas this week it seems like, oh, those alliances didn't mean as much as we perceived them to mean, and then people were willing to like vote across their new alliance lines, whatever, and try to stick David versus Goliath, whereas last week it was still semi David versus Goliath, but people were trying to reach across the tribal lines. So I think it's really interesting. Like, we don't know the full story, but like Angelina does make a really good point. Like, time and time again, we see it.
Yeah, especially because we see like women being voted off to like weaken their male counterparts. And we have a whole video on this, like I said. So if you're interested in hearing us talk more about like sexism in Survivor, you can find that video on our channel. So
Yeah, and there's only like 4 females left out of 10. Everyone pre-merge was like a female identified person being voted
Except for
out, or
Jeremy.
yeah, Jeremy and then Pat, which like that
Pat wasn't voted out though.
but yeah. So, yeah, like whatever, but I don't know. I think it's interesting for Mike because Alec tells Nick that Mike is the one like gunning or whatever, haha, for Christian. And then it's like everyone's on board to vote Christian. And so I feel like Mike maybe could be in a not so hot spot in the next few weeks. I feel like he definitely could be finding himself maybe at the bottom of the Goliath alliance and then at the bottom of a David alliance if something were to like form again. Because if you're Nick and you hear like your Rockstar Alliance guy is throwing your other buddy under the bus, if you're Christian, you're like, what the hell is the Strike Force anymore if Mike's throwing your name out there?
Yeah, it's like in doing that, he basically destroyed the whole alliance because he showed that like they're not actually allies. So I think it's interesting because often we see these telephone games like turn out not well actually for the people doing the telling. Because then Mike could be like, oh, it was actually Alec who was doing all this stuff. And it's like, you can play it whatever you want when you like play telephone because then someone can always be like, well, they misunderstood me. This is what I actually meant. So that'll be interesting to see how Mike tries to like spin it next week, if he tries to spin it at all. Because earlier in the episode, Nick was talking about how like if Angelina had just come clean and said like, I made a bold move and it didn't pay off, then he would have respected her more than doing all of her like wishy-washy, oh, Elizabeth was following me stuff. So.
Yeah, and I think I don't know, I don't necessarily see Mike being in like the chopping block seats next week. I think there's probably bigger fish to fry. I feel like Mike will just find himself in a sticky situation where he can't get the people power behind him to garner like enough votes to get his plans enacted anymore, or like especially with the Davids, I don't think he's going to have a strong footing within both groups. Even with the Goliaths, we see, I don't know, Mike's just like not in the top 3, 4 in an alliance. And so I feel like he can find himself at the bottom of any kind of alliance he's trying to form within this end portion of the game. So I don't know if it's looking good for Mike. We'll see. Mike is fun to watch. I think Alec, it's a good move for him to tell like Nick, if he wants the Davids to stay in the game, if Alec wants Christian to stay in the game, then Alec telling Nick is beneficial for his game.
Yeah, and I think it's also beneficial because then Alec paints himself as kind of like the savior of the Davids. And he can like use that as leverage in future votes. Like, remember that time I told you that Mike was gunning for you? Now you owe me. So
yeah, which I think the bad thing, like, it reinforces his alliance with Nick. So Alec and Nick get closer. That's always good. We see they have some kind of budding friendship. Alec also likes Christian, so they can have more of a bond maybe after this because he technically saved him kind of thing. And he wants to work with Christian. I think the bad thing next week could be if people figured out like who spilled the beans. There's no way you split the votes if you didn't know like the plan, who was going to be voted out, that kind of thing. So if the word gets around that like Alec is being this like spy and telling all of like the secrets to everyone and being a blabbermouth like we've seen, and being too flippy in like votes kind of thing, then things I feel like could bite him in the ass. But if people don't necessarily care that the vote got spilt before the tribal council, then Alex playing the middle pretty darn well, then he's in a good position next week because even in this 6-5, potentially 5-5, or like, yeah, potentially with a tie vote kind of thing coming up with a vote steal, like the Davids wouldn't target Alec to be voted out because they like Alec. So if things go that way, I think they're going to take out a different Goliath because they like working with Alec. They're friends with Alec. So I think Alec is in a fine position if there is any kind of blow up next week.
I feel like Alec can also maybe play the whole I was flushing an idol card, and he could be like, I had no way of knowing like the way that things would shake out otherwise, you know, because he could be like, well, the Davids have had an idol and I didn't want them to I wanted them to use it, or like I wanted to see if they had an idol or something. And like obviously that's not a super great thing to be saying, to just be like, oh, I did it just because of an idol, but it might help him from getting into hot water if people approach him and are like, why did you spill the beans? So we'll have to see how things go for Alec.
Yeah, I think it's weird. I don't know. I'm rooting for Alec, I guess. He's just like interesting. I can't tell. He every single vote, he's like quote unquote messed it up somehow by like doing his own Alec thing, which is really interesting. But I think he's in a fine spot, especially because the Goliaths, even if they are pissed off, they're not going to target another Goliath member like we saw this week too. Like people disliked Angelina, they wanted to vote her out, but looking at the numbers, you realize you sort of need to have the upper hand, so you need to keep someone maybe you don't like as much as other people in order to further your position in the game. And I think it's interesting Alec telling Nick this week about the vote versus Angelina telling Elizabeth last week about the vote, and the differences between them, and then like how they came off among people. Because Angelina telling Elizabeth it was like, holy crap, she's getting jury votes kind of thing, versus Alec telling Nick, I think he went about it in a different way that it doesn't come off as schemy, like Alex just telling his buddy Nick, whereas we didn't see a friendship between Angelina and Elizabeth. Alec isn't telling Christian that he's being voted out. Alec is telling someone he's close with, he knows is close with Christian, that Christian is going to be voted out. So Alec did a more looped way that got the end result, whereas Angelina telling Elizabeth straight up, I don't know, it wasn't really meant to change a vote. I feel like it was just meant to tell her some information.
Yeah, it also was kind of like obvious jury management because, like you said, Alec didn't go straight to Christian, so it wasn't like he was begging for Christian's jury vote. So I think it was interesting too the way Angelina like just couldn't fess up, because I feel like if Alex asked, he'll probably be like, "Oh yeah, I mentioned it to Nick, but I didn't think that he was going to do anything or whatever." So it's like fessing up to doing something is always better, I think.
Yeah, and you can also play like the I'm dumb card, like, oh, I didn't know they had an idol. We all didn't think they had an idol kind of thing. Or like, we maybe thought they had an idol, but in the end, they didn't split the votes. But the 7, like, couldn't have split the votes anyway, because then it would be 4-3, and then the Davids had 5, so it wouldn't make any sense. But yeah, it's like you could play the like, oh, haha, like I'm not as smart card, but it was so good. Davey at Tribal plays an idol for Christian. The viewers were freaking bamboozled as heck because Davey, the entire episode, was like, I have an idol. No one knows about it. We have 2 advantages on the David side now. We have the vote steal. We have Carl's idol nullifier. But no one knows I have an idol. So come Tribal, Davey stands up. Great move. Great acting by everyone at Tribal. Everyone was like fake acting, like, oh my God, what's happening? I didn't know Davey had an idol. Davey in his speech to Jeff was like, sorry for like not telling people in my alliance, but chances are he probably, like everyone in the alliance, knew in order to fulfill this plan. And so I think great acting on everyone's part to try to like trick everyone else into thinking that the Davids aren't 5, 6 strong, whatever, at this Tribal, versus like everyone's on board with the same plan.
Yeah, and then Dan playing his idol for Angelina, I thought it was so like bitter irony, the fact that Dan spends this like entire episode being like, I don't like Angelina, I want Angelina to go home, and then he like straight up plays an idol for her. I'm like, oh my goodness. I thought it was especially like, I wouldn't say funny or ironic, but it like had some zing. The fact that Dan voted out one of his closer allies in an attempt to save Angelina and like make himself look better, I feel like. So
Yeah, it definitely is sort of funny, I guess. It really sucks for Dan, but like Dan coming across as the I love Kara guy. I'm gonna like hold 3 bags at the reward challenge and then drop 1 guy. It's sort of like, this is like the cherry on the top of the cake. I think Dan playing the idol for Angelina, good move, you know, but I think maybe a bad move personally, obviously, because he doesn't like Angelina and he likes John. But like you in this situation, you sort of have to play it for Angelina. You know, you told her that you would give it to her. And even though you were telling other people, like, I'm not going to use it kind of thing, I don't really want to. In this situation, I feel like you can't really go back on your word. Angelina would literally hate Dan if she was sent to Ponderosa, like, badmouth him the entire time to every freaking jury member who's coming into Ponderosa. Angelina, you know, she would probably talk about Dan and not get him votes at the end because she's sitting in Ponderosa after being backstabbed with this no idol play. And I think if Dan didn't play the idol for her and was like being selfish or whatever because he doesn't like her, and then the way things turn out is the way things turned out this episode, Angelina would still be in the game. John would still be voted out. And he didn't play the idol on her. So she'd still probably be pissed off. Like, dude, why did you not play the idol on me? You didn't know votes were going for John. And oh, well, looking back, Dan is probably sad he used the idol for someone he didn't like. But I think it's a good social move now. Angelina's trust him. Like, oh, he played an idol for me. Sucks that John went home kind of thing. But like, it shows that he's an alliance man.
yeah, and I think also, shoot, it just flew straight out of my head. I had something that was really witty to say, but I guess it wasn't witty enough for me to remember it.
Oh, I think, yeah, Davy playing the idol too. Like, let's see. Okay, yeah, Nick is unsure that doing something and like bringing awareness to himself is a good thing right now. It'd put a target on his back. He wants to fly under the radar, but then playing the idol for Christian plus knowing that you have a vote steal gets you the numbers next week. And then there's an even more chance that like the Davids could pull something out, because I think if you let Christian go home this week because you're like, I want to save my advantage, I want to save it to the final 6, like they're trying to say they want to save it for, it's like, will you even get to that sweet spot where you're going to have this amazing idol play, save yourself, if you keep on holding on to it? So I think they did a good thing this week, even though Davy wanted to hold on to it. It's like, if you think about it, this week, you idol out someone. Next week, you can vote steal someone. You have a fighting chance. Where versus if you let Christian go home, you're at such a numbers disadvantage that you're probably going to be like pagonged off after this episode. So I think it's a good timing play. And I think that's something hard to figure out when's like the perfect timing to use your beloved advantages. But Christian is a threat. I think you do need to vote him off sometime. Otherwise, I think he can win this game. So you need to keep him around because he's a David number. But I think long run, you sort of do need to vote him out because he's a good player or like can potentially win.
I think it would also be interesting, though, like if the Davids continue to save Christian, that could be something that they use at the final tribal council. Like, we kept saving Christian because he kept being an idiot and getting votes for himself. So Christian wouldn't be here without me. And I feel like that's kind of a weak argument, but if he does get to final tribal, that could be an argument. So
yeah, if it would have to be like Davy and Christian at final tribal with someone else, then Davy could sort of play that argument and be like, you can't vote for Christian. He wouldn't even be here if it weren't for me. But then you can also be like,
why were you stupid enough to bring him here?
Yeah, like, why'd you save me kind of thing. But I think it's very interesting. You cannot save your advantage for like the perfect sweet stop time. And this week was amazing. I think it was such a good plan, and I'm glad Alec told him. Otherwise, it'd be a straight pagonging these next few weeks. So, like on a viewer level, I'm glad this is happening. From a Goliath level, maybe not so much. From a David level, I'm like, hell to the yeah! Like, let's go. It's a great plan. First, you flush an idol. Second, you get more of the numbers, and you vote out someone who's Dan is close to, so you like effectively hurt the main macho majority guy because they think Dan's in charge of the Goliaths right now. Vote out his right-hand person in John. You flush an idol, you get more of the numbers, and you vote out someone strong, someone good at immunity challenge potentially, and someone who is friends with Dan.
Yeah. And then it also sets them up really well for next week because, like you said, they have not the majority yet, but they have close enough to the majority that it's like good, because if they use the vote steal and they use it correctly, then they can then have 6-5 majority over the Goliaths instead of the Goliaths having 6-5 majority over them. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Dan was the next one to go, just because they put some lines in this episode that was like, one day Dan is going to get his comeuppance. And I'm like, it has to happen pretty soon. Otherwise, they wouldn't have like made a whole point of like, oh, this is going to come and bite him in the butt, unless they meant for it to be like, John is getting voted out, and that's one of Dan's big allies. But
yeah, I'm like, it's gonna be so good, and I think the Dan foreshadowing has been mentioned a few times the past 2 or 3 episodes, especially when Allison started talking about it. Dan getting voted out with an idol, maybe 2 idols would have been a lot sweeter, but 1 idol still fine. I think Dan might feel confident next week that he's not going home based on the initial numbers. You're like, we still have the majority. I'm not being targeted. And so he might not play it because they don't know about the vote steal. I think it's interesting because we also see Kara in the preview for next episode being like, I need to distance myself from Dan kind of thing. So we might see that falling out next week too. And I don't see Angelina on the chopping block for a 3rd week in a row now, because it's sort of like now Angelina has come to the point where she has not a lot of social capital left. Like, voting her out wouldn't really make a dent in the Goliath tribe, and at such a pivotal point in the game and potentially where the Davids could gain majority, why are you going to vote out someone that the Goliaths already don't like? You're basically helping them get rid of their extra fat on their tribe. So I think you have to aim for someone bigger next week, and there'd be no point in voting Angelina. It's like the Three Musketeers voting Philip. You're sort of voting out someone who you thought was a factor, but sort of is a non-factor in the whole big alliance of the game. And I don't think Angelina should go home next week, because you could totally get someone else out that has more like social capital in the game.
yeah, and I think it's interesting just because we haven't been seeing a lot of some of the Goliaths, like Allison, who's she? So I think it would be really funny if, well, not funny, but it would be kind of sad if they like were like, Allison is the heart of the Goliath Alliance. We must vote her out. Because then it would be like, oh, guys, what are you doing?
Yeah, because it's like, who else are you targeting? I wouldn't target Angelina. Alec, you're friends with him. You wouldn't target him. Kara, you have not seen anything like with her and the Davids really. And then Dan, and then Mike, and then someone else is there, I feel like. But like, Dan is really, I feel like, the big dog you want to probably vote out at this pivotal tribal. And they think Dan's leading the Goliath team. So if you vote him out, that could open up some potential enterprises of alliances.
Yeah, I think that is definitely true. And I think it was interesting because Mike earlier was giving us the rundown of like all of the Davids and which of them could potentially win the game. And he was like correct about everything. And the fact that Christian, I feel like, is the only David that could seriously have winner potential at this point, just because, like he said, Carl and Davy and maybe Nick, but Carl and Davy just like aren't strategic enough, and Gabby isn't charismatic enough. Like Gabby's main personality trait is that she cries. So it's like,
I think Davy could have a chance. I think he's been getting a lot of good screen time, especially after this episode. People might take him more seriously as well. I think Nick has a really good chance, like we've seen in those Reddit posts of like who has the most number of confessionals. Nick is the number one confessional getter, so I think he has a really good chance too. He's definitely flying under the radar, and he doesn't have other factors going against him. So I think that could be a good chance. And I don't know, I think going back to the tribal council when both idols were played, and then I'm like, frick, it's going to be a 7-5 vote. And then on the revote, the Goliaths would still have a majority. That doesn't make any sense. Like, if no votes are cast and you're going to revote and then the Goliaths still have the upper hand. I was like, what the hell? Like, what's going to happen after this? And then they read John's name and I'm like, wow, this is so good, but so sad. Like, such a good plan, but like, oh, dang, it was so good.
yeah, I think I was really satisfied with this tribal just because like the editing gave enough clues that if you were really thinking, you might have been able to figure it out. But it's like not one of those edits where you like know right before tribal who's going home. So
Yeah, and I think just like it's really interesting to see how quickly things can change because like we saw Mike was sketched about Gabby and Christian this episode, and it's like, dude, I thought we all were in an alliance. Last week we were so gung-ho about the strike force. We were like, this is such a cool alliance. We like all 6 of these people. Like, I want the strike force, blah, blah, blah. But then this week we were like, oh, haha, rip the strike force and the Brochachos. I don't know. I think it's so interesting how like these alliances, like it's separate friendship versus alliance, and people are able to compartmentalize these things versus other seasons we've seen where people are like, I need to be friends with everyone in my alliance and like I cannot backstab them, versus this, it's like people realize like this is a game. You are my friend. We are like the Brochachos, whatever, but that does not mean I'm not willing to vote your ass out of the game.
yeah, I think it's really interesting too because their alliances are more fluid, but they don't have like the whole voting block type thing where that was a time when alliances were referred to as voting blocks.
Yeah.
Flashback Friday, guys. It's not Friday. But
Saturday. And yeah, I think just the challenges this episode were so cool. The sandbag one was so tough looking. I'm like, this would be so cool to play in. I mean, I don't know. Everything was just so stressful to watch. The reward challenge was great. I loved it. The pizza looked but it was fun to watch and was so stressful. Like, you're just wishing for this challenge to be over because your arms are burning, your legs are burning. Immunity challenge brings up Brad Culpepper like 6 million times. People drop so quickly. Then it's an Angelina versus Dan showdown. I was like, this is so, like, of course this would happen. These 2 people are potentially on the chopping block and both of them need it. And Dan won.
yeah, I was kind of like, that Dan won just because, like, I don't like him anymore. I never really liked him. I really don't like him now. I also just thought the part where he said Brad Culpepper is my hero, I was like, that is the nail in your coffin. Like,
yeah. I mean, overall, such a good episode. I am very excited next week. We are probably seeing a vote steal being played and played correctly. So let's get it on. I think this is going to be a great rest of the season. And then potentially 2 people going home next week, because I feel like the Thanksgiving episode usually is like the really quick, either 1 hour they squeeze 2 episodes in or the 2 hours they play 2 episodes. But I think it seems like a 1 hour time slot, which I hate those. They don't have any challenges or any like talking. 2 people just literally go home back to back. And I'm like, what is happening? Nothing.
Yeah. So let us know who you think is going home next week in the comment section down below. Do you think that the Davids are going to play their vote steal correctly? We really want to know what you think because we have no clue. Well, we have clues, but you know what I mean.
More
So
opinions.
yeah,
Yeah,
let
but
us know.
thank you all so much for watching. Again, thank you so much for 400, and we will see you all next week over Thanksgiving break. So have a good Thanksgiving because we'll see you after it. So, yes.
Bye.